So I'm Ziyin Yu, assistant professor of Chinese studies at the College of Worcester. So my college has collaborated with Chinese School Association in the United States to organize the Asian American and the Pacific Island AAPI Lecture Series on Zoom. So this lecture series features 4 AAPI scholars and activists and is meant to draw attention to AAPI history through the lens of race, immigration, culture, and activism, as well as AAPI community's contribution to shaping American society. Thanks a lot for joining us to attend our first lecture today. Professor Zhang Wenxian at the Rollins College will give the first lecture for the AAPI lecture series. So first, I will ask Shah, a board member and vice president of Chinese School Association in the United States, to introduce Professor Zhang Wenxian. So Xia Ben Xia is also the president and co-founder of Red Blue International, as well as the president and co-founder of Flat World Foundation, a non-profit organization promoting research, discussion, and initiatives of globalization. Xia Laoshi, please go ahead to introduce Professor Zhang Wenxian.
Thank you, Professor Yu. And my name is Ben Xia. I'm the Vice President of Chinese School Association in the United States. It's our great honor to co-organize today's event. The Chinese School Association is a national association for Chinese schools. We have 400 member schools from coast to coast, and we cover 100,000 students in the US and 8,000 teachers. So when we were planning today's event, we were not all worry about the general peace of the world. Now today, this topic is even more important than ever. The United States and the whole world are looking how China will position itself in the current situation. This will definitely affect how the US sees China and the Chinese people in this time of history and in the future. So it's so precious for us to be able to listen to Professor Zhang's research and views in the history, so that we can all learn from history and do better today. Peace. Now, please allow me to introduce Professor Wenxian Zhang to you. Professor Wenxian Zhang has been a member of Rollins College faculty since 1995. He is a recipient of Cornell Distinguished Faculty Service Award, author of Vining Davis Fellow, a member of the Asian Study Program, and a full professor in the College of Liberal Arts in Winter Park, Florida. His written academic books related to China include Huawei Goes Global, Made in China for the World, Huawei Goes Global, Regional Geopolitical Perspectives and Crisis Management, China's Belt and Road Initiative, Changing the Rule of Globalization, The Entrepreneur and the Business Elites of China, The Chinese Written Who Have Shaped Modern China, a guide to the top 100 companies in China. So Wenxian Zhang is also a recipient of Dorothy Dodd Outstanding Archivist Award and the Patrick D. Smith Award from the Florida Historical Society, the Award of Excellence from the Society of Florida Archivists, and the Community Service Award from Greater Orlando Chinese Professionals Association. His 2018 book, China Through American Eyes, Early Depictions of the Chinese People and Culture in the US Print Media, has also received the Jin Liao Award for the best research from the Chinese American Librarian Association in 2019. Without further ado, let's welcome Professor Wenxian Zhang.
Thank you so much, President Xiami and Professor Yu. It is really my great honor to share my learning experience with this group of people who share the common interests. We all not only have shared the common interests, but also most of us have the common cultural heritage as well. So let me first share my screen so I'll get the program going. So you were able to see my screen, correct, right? Thank you. So this is a research project I did a few years back. It's actually one of my last sabbatical. What happened is in our library, we in the archive of Rollins College Olin Library, we have some special collections. I noticed we have 4 runs of Harper's Monthly, which is one of the oldest and continue publishing magazine in America. And also we have a few volumes of Harper's Weekly, which contains some visual depictions of Chinese and of Chinese culture, Chinese people. That poked my interest. So for my last sabbatical, I began to study this visual documentations. So basically, my goal is I want to provide a visual depictions of American perception of Chinese people and culture. And I want to explore and examine the dynamics of American and Chinese culture exchange since the middle of 19th century. And of course, the goal is to help everybody, help the general public develop a broad comprehension of historical events and the era we are studying here. And ultimately, the goal is to help contribute to a better understanding between American and Chinese people. So in my research, I want to keep it manageable, make it doable. So I only focus on engravings, lithographic prints, cartoons, sketches, illustrations. Most of my resources came from newspapers, magazines, some books, a few brochures, a few advertisements, postcards, etc. This by no means is a comprehensive collection. It's just a selection of various graphics depicting the Chinese people and the Chinese culture. Time frame is from first Opium War. It's 1840 to 1911. You know, that is the time where the large scale interaction between U.S. and China taking place. Even though U.S. tried to establish the connection right after the founding of the republic, they sent the emperors of China sailed into Guangzhou Harbor in the 1780s, but really the large scale exchange taking place after the Golden Rush of the 1840s. And of course, the downfall of the Qing Empire and the founding of the Republic of China, that's a very, very important historical period in modern Chinese history. So that is my time frame. So here's the first picture I present in my book. This is a typical Western American perception of the world around middle of 19th century. This is published in Barlow's pictorial drawings, Room Companion. This date is December 1855. The artist is renowned Hermit Billings of Boston. So this presented the outlook of Americans around mid-19th century. I can actually zoom in so you can see better. So on the Western Hemisphere, that's the Lady Liberty, Lady Columbia here. The war with the Native American is almost over. So the Native American warrior is already at the feet of Lady Liberty. Americans still looking toward the West, but on the East Hemisphere, this is the Europe with 2 honor guards, Arab princess and African black warrior as her honor guard. Typical Western centric world viewpoint. And here's China. This is, by the way, India snake charmer, and this is China. This is an old gentleman hold an umbrella, wear a bamboo hat. This pagoda. So according to the Editor. This is the editorial. Separated from its nearest point by 1,000 leagues of ocean, we are apt to look at it less as the integral portions of the common heritage of humanity than as another world. It is in the common parlance, the old world, another planet at its world. Distinguished land is landed that enchantment which belongs over to the remote in space and time. So basically, they feel that China belongs to another planet. So that's the viewpoint. By the way, this picture here is a Crimean War, Russia fighting against other Western powers and lost. So we are currently facing another war in Ukraine. Here's another typical picture depicting the prevailing racism, colonialism, and cultural imperialism at the dawn of the 20th century. So this artwork by Victor Jilan is based on a poem by Rudyard Kipling. His poem is titled "The White Man's Burden." Who are the white man's burden? So in the basket on the back of John Bull, the British imperialist, it is Egypt, India, Sudan, South Africa, that time called Zulu, and China. For Uncle Sam, his load include Philippines, Cuba, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico, and Samoa. So basically, this depicting both Jumbo letting Uncle Sam uphill from the depths of the barbarism to the height of a civilization. You can see the barbarism here, oppressions, vice, and here's top of the civilization. And the poem is so racist. One of the sentences called "You newly called Sulan people, half devil, half child." So that's the viewpoint. So-called white man burden, very, very popular poem. Of course, the Sino-US relationship was portrayed in the US print media. So the top right picture, this is a negotiating of a Treaty of Tianjin with Mr. Reid, which is the US commissioner. This is with 直隶总督直隶 Viceroy 唐廷香. So this is on May 4th, 1858. The Harper Weekly noted, "Our attitude of neutrality would enable us to make a better terms with the Chinese than the belligerents of European could obtain." So this is actually a Chinese artist drawing. On the bottom right, this is the American artist drawing. Very interesting for this one is that artists were not allowed present at the negotiation. So this is the first United States minister, Mr. Ward, who visited Beijing. This is in the City Hall. They called 顺天府. So he just imagined this courtyard looked like Islamic influence. The character looked like from Byzantine Empire. So, but you can see the quill is definitely a Chinese clerk taking notes. This the lower left picture. This is a very significant event in the Chinese diplomatic history. This is marked the gentleman low on the far right, Anson Burlingame, who is the first ambassador stationed in China, and also he served as first ambassador from China to Western powers. So his trip, his mission is really symbolized the Chinese court abandoned Sino-centric viewpoint and began to actively engage with the rest of the world. So here, the lady Columbia introduced the gentleman is Princess Gong Qinwang, who was a minister for Zhongli Yamen, foreign minister of that time. So the caption in the Voice of America is, brothers and sisters, I'm happy to present to you the oldest member of the family who deserve the better acquaintance. So this artist, by the way, is Thomas Ness. I'm going to talk him in a second. He's had very simple, he's a artist with a conscience. He supported Chinese cause. So I'm going to show you in a second. I'm not sure if you guys can recognize some of those figures here. The first one is Emperor Dao Guang, who was they call the last sovereign. Dao Guang as the last sovereign of the Tartar dynasty who enjoyed uninterrupted powers. So you know that the Opium War happened during his era. And then second person is Hong Xiuquan, very controversial figure. He's supposed to be a Christian, but he basically built his own empire in southern China, caused tremendous damage to China and forced a lot of people flee South China. Third person, Ye Mingchen, governor of Liangguang, who was notable for his sick nose, which is when the British and the French Allied force invade Guangzhou. He was notorious. He would not fight, not make peace, not take step to defense, not die, not surrender, and not flee. He was the highest ranking Chinese officer ever captured by colonial power, and he died a year later. He wanted to go to Britain to plead the Chinese court in front of the Queen, but he was captured and died in India a year later. The last person, his name is Wang Qingfu. He's my hero. He's born in Jimo, Shandong. He was taken by American missionaries, Sally Little Holmes. He was the first person who became a United States citizen. He attended University of Louisburg, which became later Bucknell University. So he came to United States in the 1860s, late 60s. And he's the first person to start using the term of Chinese Americans. And he challenged the white supremacist with a dude, and that guy chickened out. Dennis Kearney. So when I published my book, I dedicated to Wang Qingfu. He's a brave leader and pioneers of the Chinese Americans. Here's some wars and aggressions in China. First picture depicting the Taiping Rebellion. This is a Taiping force against Qing Imperial Army. This is a bombardment of Guangzhou. This is the Second Opium War. This is a picture of Daku Fortress fight, where the U.S. supposed to be on the neutral side, but U.S. will provide naval support when British and the French force was under attack. So that's in the Harper's Weekly. And here's a picture depicting the growth of Chinese military power. This is in the 19th century. This is by the time when Republic of China was established in 1911, Xinhai Revolution. A lot of pictures of landscape of Qing Empire. This is the Yanshan Mountain. Here's the Beijing. When the first minister entered in Beijing, that's how they pictured. And this is Mr. Reed Conway entered the front gate, Qianmen district. This is also an interesting story. There's the reporter noticed one lady, Chinese lady, holding a Bible that make a very emotional moment for this mission. And here's the Taihu in southern China, Suzhou water bridge. Frying tea leaves, cormorant fishing, pump water to the rice field. And here's harvest rice in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, we all know, it is a fishing village in early days. And the journalists also make note: women walking in the field, kids playing around, men on the water fishing and doing whatever. And here's a picture of Wei Hai Wei. This is the Chinese coolie pieing coal. This is a steamship era. The coal is the power to power the steamship. That's before the oil being widely adopted. So this strategic asset. So in order to save time, the Chinese have this portable kitchen to take the food to the walking site for people to take a quick break before they resume their work. Shoemakers, here's a very interesting picture. They call a bump boat. This is a picture of steamship arriving in Chinese harbor. Before they were allowed to get on land, here's the local Chinese offering fresh fruits, sweet dessert, treat to the foreigners. Even though this is in China, you can see the position of the foreigners standing above the deck of the ship. The local Chinese, they are much lower position. So very interesting contrast. Again, for concessions in China, this is the Catholic nuns runs orphanage. Here's in Jiaozhouwan, Qingdao. This is the Wei Hai Wei. When the German take Qingdao, British want to have their base to counter the Germans' station. So they just forcibly occupy Wei Hai Wei on the northern Shandong Peninsula. So you can see again the sharp contrast. The front of the German soldier, the back of the Chinese coolie. The rifle and the shackles, the Chinese labor were chained, and also he's standing up, he's squat down doing the work. Multiple sharp contrast point. Arrogance of a British sailor, frustration of the Chinese Mandarin officers. Here is the picture of a junk boat in the harbor. Again, the dilapidated of the sails versus the brilliance of the steamship in the back. Faith and religions. God of mercy, Guanyin. God of war. This is Guanyin Chang. This is the god of five greens, Wu Gu, Pan Nong Shi. This is 这是盘龙开天地 ，I'm sorry， 这个是神农氏 ，sorry。God of Thunder, God of Midwife， 宋子观音。This is Goldbuster， 钟馗驱鬼。And of course, we have a literary God, God of literacy. Some entertainment scenes, acrobat, flying kite, street entertainment, Chinese opera, dragon boat racing, horse racing. This is a British thing, but you see the Chinese in the audience. Opium den, of course, they were imported by British. This is a street vendor. This is a gambling stand in the, on the street of Fuzhou. Women's of China. This is a working class women. You see the barefoot, now bound feet. Upper class, they wear silks. And this also, this is in the colony in Shanghai, Bubbling Well Road, which is Nanjing Road today. You can see well-to-do Chinese. Back then, China is just like a first world country and third world country combined together, just like today. And this is a very interesting picture here, the last one. The lady, her husband was a tailor to foreigners because he worked with foreign folks, make a good income. So his wife, actually from working class to begin with, has the resources. So she would pretend that she had bound feet. So she wear a special shoes. So she had to wear with a cane, with an umbrella to pretend she's from upper class. Children's of China and also families. This is you can recognize this is the Zhuazhou, the first birthday to tell whether you're going to what kind of career you're going to pursue. Whether you pick out the pen, you're going to become a scholar. Pick out money, you're going to be a businessman, etc. Anxious to worship. This is if you get sick, you pass through this gate. Superstition. So the second part of my research is focused on the Chinese in Americas. So I think that's probably most of you guys are interested. This is a really heartbreaking story. What happened is this is on a boat called US Norway, which was built in 1857. Was an American cargo ship loaded with coal from the United States to the naval station squadron in East Asia. So Norway, after unloaded the coal in Australia, is returned to Macau and loaded the coolie. Coolie basically the coolie trade. The Chinese term is 贩猪仔. Literally means the piglet trade. So this is embarking on the U.S. Norway in 1857. And here's the two translators. They are interracial. They are between. They have parents of Chinese and Portuguese because Macau was the Portuguese colony then. So those two serve as a translator. This boat carried about 1,038 Chinese coolie. The trade, the price to shift one coolie is $80. When it reached to the destination, the price for auction off one healthy coolie is $300. So the profit margin is 375%. So because of this huge profit, so the operator, the owners, they packed so many people on to the boat. They are not allowed to go on the deck, so everybody sleep under. The living condition is horrible. So 2 to 3 days into the journey, the Chinese coolie plot to mutiny. They plan to overtake the ship. But then, because of this fight, the plot was reported to the management. So they began to seal this hatch. So now coolie can get onto the deck. So what happened is the coolie, they have the kitchen knife. They want to sell they want to put the boat. They actually set fire under the deck to try to destroy the ship. They demand that ship to be sailed to Thailand. So they want to escape to Thailand. They don't want to go to the United States. Then what the management team, they of course they had the weapons. They began shooting underneath, and they put this canvas. They sealed all the air duct. So because there's no oxygen, so the fire extinguished itself eventually. So a dozen people get killed. Then another challenge is all the water is stored under the deck. They will not be able to get the fresh water. So the folks above the deck, they began to run the steam to steal the water, to steal the ocean water, so that they survive. So after the back and forth, I think 2 days, so finally the Chinese coolie gave up. So a total of 70 people are killed. By the time when they reach to, actually this is not to the United States, to Cuba, I'm sorry. So another 60 people died along the way. So totally this, the mortality rate is about 13%. So this is led to the condemnation. This, what happened is that the person who witnessed this event, he was on board of this ship. He was a doctor. His name is Edgar Holden. He was an American physician. He was on board the ship. So he recorded this. This led to the condemnation, which according to Harper's Week, this is Harper's Monthly, 1864. Almost everyone had embedded the indefinite idea of a gigantic wrong that involved against human liberties, and have called down the legislative denunciation of a civilized government. So after this incident, the United States government passed, this is 1862, an act to prohibit the coolie trade by American citizens in American vessels. So this was signed by President Lincoln in 1862. So abandoning any further American ship involved in coolie trade, which is basically a slave trade. After the Chinese immigrants arrived on the West Coast, they were first involved with gold mining. Unlike the white laborers, they basically form as a team. They are mostly come from 6 counties of Taishan district. So that's why there's a 6 district association. They organize as a team. So they work in the abandoned mines by white miners. So because they work as a team, they were still able to find a good amount of gold. After the gold mine exhausted, the Chinese immigrants began to working on the cross-Pacific Railroad. So this is in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Most of those Chinese immigrants, they came from southern China, never seen snow in their life. But because the management want to claim the prize money, they want to beat the deadline. So they push the Chinese forward, despite this horrible working conditions. So at least more than 1,000 people died along the way because of harsh working conditions. And at the peak, there's more than 10,000 Chinese immigrants working on the cross-Pacific Railroad. That's kind of about 90% of the labor force. But you all know that on the Golden Spike ceremony, when the two railroads join together, connect the railroad across the U.S. Continent, now Chinese was pictured in that ceremony. And after the Chinese after the railroad was completed, the U.S. Suffered economic recession. So the Chinese were pushed out. They were basically congregated in the Chinatowns, and they get into the service industries, like a restaurant. This is the Chinese restaurant in San Francisco. And also they work in the agriculture industry. This is press grapes to make wines. You can see the Chinese doing the work here. Unfortunately, the Chinese people are not allowed to own the land, so they can only work as hired hands. And later on, when the economic goes downhill, they were pushed out. So the economic recession, when the railroad was completed, a great deal of people moved from East Coast to West Coast. Civil War concluded. A lot of veterans returned back to society. When the economic was in bad shape, they could not find a job, and people began to make acquisitions. So they think that the Chinese was the cause of all the evils in America. So they began to call the slogan, "The Chinese must go." So this is the first. This picture is April 5th, 1876. It was the first protest by people in mass against the Asiatic plague that threatened the ruins of California, which was presided by the California governor, William Irvin. So this is the first mass protest in Sacramento. Here, the portrait of Irish immigrants try to throw the Chinese immigrant into the Pacific Ocean. Well, the white plantation owners want the Chinese go to the south to replace African Americans working in the agricultural field. So there's a call to import a large number of Chinese into the American South. A few people made into South, but largely it was just a movement, never materialized. Here, the bottom left is the massacre of Rock Spring in Wyoming in 1885, which is one of the most terrible tragedy against Chinese immigrants, where at least 28 Chinese immigrants were murdered. And the terrible thing is that nobody was held accountable. The Chinese in Chinatown celebrate a Lunar New Year, and this is if you zoom in, you're going to see this person holding a bucket of fish. You all know fish means abundance. Picture above the balcony, that's the ladies of the Chinese Chinatown. Of course, firecrackers, anxious to worship in Chinatown. This is Zhonghua Shanghui, Chamber of Commerce, the wealthy Chinese that time. Chinese opera in Chinatown. Some of Western audience you can see in the picture here. They when they play opera, it goes for several days. So it's a major entertainment in Chinatown that time. Here's some profile of the Chinese American. But let me actually zoom in. Here you can see Chinese miners going to work. You can see the facial feature. Look like a Western person, except that this long quote. They indicate that he's a Chinese immigrant. Because at that time, there's only a limited interaction for Chinese with Western artists. So they have not yet figured out how to better portray the Asian people. Here, this is a very dark scene of the Chinese temple in Chinatown. Ear shaking, remove the ear wax in Chinatown. Here's iron the clothes during the laundry work. Here you're going to see. By then, the picture here is much more realistic. This is by a turn of century in San Francisco. You can almost feel the sweat from the person doing the hard labor. There's another very popular phrase in the late 19th century. This is based on this poem by American poet. His name is Bret Harte. He was an American author. He best known for his short fictions featuring miners, gamblers, and other romantic figures of California gold rush. So he wrote this poem called, originally titled "The Plain Language from the Truthful James." He's actually have a Jewish heritage. He's trying to portray that he want to expose the white man's hypocrisy, because the whole story is the Chinese miners named Asin playing with a card game with this Billy Knight, who's a white miner. He tried to cheat, and he was automatically outsmarted by Asin. Heathen Chinese, heathen just means a person without a major religion, without faith. So he's tried, so Harte's original attempts to try to expose the white man's hypocrisy, but his ambiguity over the race was too subtle. So this poem really shifted the American conception of the Chinese more than any other writings of the time. During the entire Chinese rallies, this popular poem was recited by people in the protest. So that become the term when they describe the Chinese in America in the late 19th century. They all say peasant Chinese. that's where it comes from. This point. Here's some political advertisements related to the Chinese question in American politics. The first one is, I'm sorry, let me go back. I want to zoom in so you can see it better. The first one, this gentleman at the bottom his name is George Gorham. He was a Republican candidate in the 1867 governor's election in California. He was portrayed. He was criticized. This campaign poster with an obnoxious tone of racial discrimination. So this basically attack Gorham's advocacy of voting rights for Black and other minorities. So this on his shoulders is African Americans, the Chinese immigrants, and Native Americans. The notations indicate the load you are carrying will sink you in prediction where you belong. Or my name is not Johnson. So this is Uncle Sam. And you see the monkey here, you know what that means. Here is indicate that the Chinese become a member of American family, but you can see the face of the Chinese baby with a gentle face of Lady Columbia. And here is the bottom box. This one is the notation is would it not be splendid if you could use the Chinese voting cattle, as we did with niggers in the southern states. So two white people watching the ballot box, the Chinese can only see it, they cannot vote. And here, this one's titled the Chinese Puzzle, which demonized Chinese American, implied that his presence will be detrimental to the future of the United States. Basically, a gigantic Chinese person on the American West Coast with a small Uncle Sam here, imply Jenny is coming out of the bottle. So the Chinese person as a monster. And this picture titled "Throw Down the Letter by Which They Arrived." They wrote, this is another picture by Thomas Nast. So he wanted to criticize the Know Nothing movement, who sought to purify American politics by limiting or ending influence of Irish Catholics and other immigrants in the United States. So he wanted to criticize those who arrived just a few decades earlier. They want to throw out the letter where they came over the wall. You can see the slogan here, the Chinese wall around the United States of America. This is also a very striking picture. They are pretty safe here, which is depicting that both sides of the American politics, they all enjoy condemn the Chinese. So the notation is when the politicians agree that unanimity Yeah, unanimity is wonderful. So the caption read, give it to him. He get no vote nor any friends. This is all the publications from the Wasp magazine. You all know what the Wasp stands for. This magazine is a weekly magazine, started in 1876 by Francis Kobo. He was a Czech immigrant. He's a leading illustrator called George Frederick Keller, was another immigrant from German. He was actually started with a cigar box lithographer. Wasp Magazine was a pioneer in color lithography. Most of his audience is middle class, working class people living in American West. So everybody else is a fair game for this racist magazine. But the Chinese bear the blunt of all their discriminations. They were often dehumanized and portrayed as investigations and subversive labor monsters, immoral, diseased, and ruthless competitors. So this one, the first one, you can see that his monopoly here is how could China, which only have a tiny percentage in the United States, they can monopoly the American industry. The fingernail look like an animal a cloud. So he had the very sinister facial expression. And here is a statue of Harbor, which is modeled after the Statue of Liberty. And his clothes look like a body of a snake. The six rays of the light have the captions of filth, immorality, disease, ruin to the white labor. And the base is infested with the rats. And it's just horrible. And here's a lady, San Francisco, attacked by a blood-sucking vampire of Chinese leprosy. So again, China was accused as the source of all the disease, just same as we recently experienced with COVID-19. So this was Stop Asian Hate is back then. That is from the beginning, from the 19th century, that the racial hatred is already there. So this one here, this is the front cover. The title is called "The Chinese Many Hands Who Can Do All Kinds of Work." Many hands, but soulless, no souls. So kind of Chinese and no moral value, no faith, no religions. They just want to come here to dominate the United States and destroy the white America as they know. Dumping Chinese like just the garbage. And this is totally disregard the Chinese immigrants, their contribution for the development of American agriculture in the West. They portray the Chinese as pest the birds. So the Uncle Sam need to blast off with a shotgun. Here's the passing of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. So Uncle Sam was able to kick the Chinese eagle dragon into the Pacific Ocean. Thomas Ness, I mentioned to you earlier. He was the father. He was called the father of American political cartoonist. He was the most influential artist in the 19th century. He was called the president maker because he carried such an influential influence. You all know that he created the symbol of elephant for Republican Party, and then he popularized the donkey for Democratic Party, and also the Lady Liberty, Uncle Sam. So he helped make that very popular notion in American popular culture. He's one of the few progressive Americans take up the course of the Chinese immigrants. As a radical Republican, he strongly condemned the slavery and advocates the civil rights and equality for all men. He not only opposed the segregation, but also he take a brave stand. So this is a very rare and demonstrated considerable political courage in the age of racial discrimination in the late 19th century. So the first picture here, I'm sorry. He draw a sharp contrast here. Good versus evil. Crying Chinese immigrants, Lady Columbia. You see her angry face, the rage of white mobs. This one is the Native Americans have a chat with Chinese immigrants. The title of this illustration is "Every Dog Has His Day." So basically, the Native Americans tell the Chinese immigrants, "I have been persecuted. Now it's your turn." Here's African Americans. He depicting some of white politicians because of their discrimination stand against Chinese immigrants. He called this John Chinaman, the Mandarins, that he signed his name here on the side of the Chinese immigrants. And here is his portrait of African Americans moved to the West. The Chinese immigrants moved to the East Coast to have a better life. Here's the equal right to all men. Well, the Chinese were kicked out of the platform. And well, the politicians tailored to the white labor force here with his drinking bottle because he can vote. That's become he become his patrons. This is the portrait of Dennis Kearney. He was a mouthpiece of Uncle Sam here. That's depicting of anti-Chinese messages. This is one of his last message by drawings of Thomas Nast related to Chinese in the United States. So this is on the passing of a Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. Here is here's the root of freedom to all trade had been ripped out because of the weight here. Both the party want to drag down the Chinese. So there's an elephant, donkey, the Chinese immigrants So he was so disappointed. He signed his name at bottom of the ocean on the lower right corner. Some of satire and humors. So Temple of Liberty, everybody allowed except the Chinese. Here is a skeleton in the closet. United States condemned Russia for their persecution of the Jews in Russia. There the artist said, "You have your own closet." That's Chinese immigrants. This is a very striking depiction. Here is a minister with his Chinese followers. The Chinese, the lady asking the question that I may go to your heaven. Well, but why is it I may go to your heaven? Well, I may not go to your country. The American missionary shrugged his shoulder. There's no labor vote in heaven. So that's this picture here. And here's another picture is let the Chinese embrace the civilization and they may stay. What the civilization means: drinking, killing the police, rioting, fighting, and that the Chinese making the comments. Because we don't do the deeds like that, that we must go and they must stay. Finally, I want to show some pictures of Russian aggressions. I was watching on the TV with horror of Russian military invasion in Ukraine. So this makes me think about how Russia was portrayed by US media when they tried to take the northeast China around turn of the 19th century. So this is right around right after the Boxer Rebellion in 1900. So Russia stationed in the northeast China, that time called Manzhou. So here's Russia against the rest of Western colonial powers. This is China, which could easily be Ukraine today. US is sitting on the fence back then, supposed to be neutral. And the weakening of China. At that time, some of the Western power want to divide China into separate colonies. US, because of their open door policy, so China was fortunate to keep as a unified country, even though suffer a great deal of aggressions from all Western powers. And different pictures, both from Puck, which is a political satire magazine. So this is on the cover of Puck magazine. After Russia had the eating in Manchuria, so they said China is safe for now. And this one titled, the dishes said Manchuria. And then the German, France, British in the back, Chinese as a server. The title of this picture is first come, first serve. Russian polar bears making false promise. House of Cards. Russian fighting with Japan, Sino-US, Sino-Russia war. So this is how Russia was portrayed by the US print media. Above all, I think that based on the history of China's interaction with the Western powers, China actually suffered a great deal more than from Russia than the rest of imperialist powers. So I think that the Chinese should strongly condemn Russia today, because we should remember the history in the past. I think I take more than I should. So I just want to briefly conclude that the cultural exchange and understanding between the United States and China is a long, a very complicated process. This, the relationship with the United States had a far-reaching impact on China's transformation into a modern country. So based on my research, definitely Chinese immigrants subject to racial persecutions and discrimination in the United States, and they have made a great contribution to the economic development and cultural diversity of the United States. I would like to conclude with this old saying from Confucius: study the past if you want to define the future. Thank you. I will take some questions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Zhang, for your very wonderful and important talk. So now the floor is open for Q&A. So feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask questions. Also feel free to type your questions in chat. Thank you. So Merrick, sorry for my pronunciation. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, it's Marek. No problem. Thank you so much for your presentation. I wanted to ask if you think Chinese immigrants posed economic threat to white Americans, and if their communities used economic tactics in the U.S. and that's contributed to the persecution. Thanks.
I think that your question broke up. So I don't think I get the complete what exactly you're asking. If you think that, if you ask my opinion whether Chinese immigrants pose the economic threat to America, do you mean back then or now?
Yeah, Marek, I think when you ask the questions, the connection was broken for like a short period of time. So will you please repeat your question, Marek? Marek, will you please unmute yourself and repeat your question, Marek? So, Professor Zhang, I think probably I heard the question is about the discrimination against the Chinese immigrants, probably in the period that you studied.
Oh, okay. Yes, definitely. The Chinese immigrants was accused because of their hard-working habits, because they are willing to work with a low wage. Some white labor forces feel that's a threat to their well-being. So that's why they call Chinese must go. They want to maintain their standard of living. They don't want to do the hard labor. So they formed the labor unions. There's a workmen's party that led by Dennis Kearney. So they pushed Chinese out of most of the factories. They were originally working in the cigar factory, shoe making factories, but most later on they're all being pushed out. They can only work in Chinatown, working in service industry like a laundromat, that's all hand washing, extra long hours, back-breaking labor, and also in the restaurant business, grocery stores. They're all very thin profit margin. They definitely make contribution to the economic development of American society back then, but they are subject for discrimination and persecutions. So yeah, they were definitely treated unfairly by Americans, especially politicians and white laborers.
Thank you so much. Marek, I think probably because of the connection, we didn't hear your full question. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask the whole question. And also feel free to type your question on chat. So Professor Zhang, I see several questions in chat. So first, Lily Yao asked, will Professor Zhang share his WeChat contact for long-term connections and education?
Sure, I can certainly share my contact information, which the organizer has it. You can send my email, which is just wzhang@rollins.edu. I watch my email all the time.
Yes, if you need Professor Zhang's contact information, email, also feel free to email me. And also if you need this lecture's recording, also email me. So my email address is at zyou@worcester.edu. So Professor Zhang, next question is, so Jim Tai writes, thanks to Professor. During the period, any positive portraits and images about China, Chinese, and Chinese culture?
Oh yes, definitely. But it's much smaller amount in terms of percentage. But definitely, there's a very positive portrait that people praise the contribution made by Chinese, and they praise Chinese culture. I actually, out of this research project, I wrote another paper called Standing Up Against Racial Discriminations, Progressive Americans and the Chinese Exclusion Act in the late 19th century. So in that article, I profiled several Chinese and Chinese Americans during this fight during the late 19th century. Among them, I mentioned earlier, one is Wang Qingfu. Another is Li Yanfu, who was a Yale graduate, who also came here, converted to a Christian, and married an American girl, and devoted himself to the cause of Chinese Americans. So those are the two representative of the Chinese Americans around that time, and then a few other people that take up the cause of the Chinese in America at that time. That's one is called Frederick B. He was a businessman, and Otis Gibson was a minister. He was stationed in China first, so he learned the language. Then he was dispatched to Chinatown in San Francisco to work with the Chinese followers. So those two voiced out their oppositions against the persecutions. So there's definitely a record like that. And then there's scholars, writers like Mark Twain, Hakeem Miller. They all take up the cause of the Chinese in America. They condemn the discriminations. So this is well documented. Mark Twain have a very narrow parochial view of the world until he moved to the West when he was working for Nevada and the California newspapers. He witnessed the persecutions, so he condemned those the brutality, the violence against Chinese. And I mentioned to you earlier the visual contamination by Thomas Nast. And then another person definitely everybody need to know his name is George Howard. He was a United States senator from Massachusetts, very liberal, very progressive American political leader. He voted against the Chinese Exclusion Act. The first time when it's published, all Democrats voted for it. The several Republicans voted against it. By 1902, when it was renewed, George Howard was the only person in both United States two House and the Senate. He was the only person voted against it because he felt that violate Americans' founding principle of civil liberty. So he declared, if I need to stand alone, I will. So I think everybody need to remember his brief act.
Thank you so much. Especially, I have learned many things new from your lecture. I think I'm teaching the anti-Asian racism class at my college. We talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act, but it was my first time to see like all the vivid images to reflect those like period history, like about the exclusion and also about hatred and so on. But of course, for me, it's almost my first time to learn about like how some Americans actually fought against the Chinese Exclusion Act. So Professor Zhang, since I'm a professor teaching about this history and all the materials, I wonder, like, will you make all the important images available like widely? So are there any ways for us to get access to all the important images?
Yes, all those pictures actually available in different databases. So that is a wonderful thing for I'm able to take advantage of many beautifully done historical resources, digital humanities. So that is, in a few years back, it's not possible. You had to go to the physical archive, a library, to dig through all the piles of historical document to find out that the picture you are interested. So there's a few rich databases you guys want to take advantage. One is the American Memory Project. So the last picture I showed you, the joined together, that one, let me actually, 1 second, let me share again so you can see. So this picture is from a Library of Congress American Memory Project. You can actually see their seal here. So you can definitely go search and browse. It's open access, and also California Library have a wonderful database you can search. Many of my collections are from there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for providing the great sources for us. I see two more questions. The first one is Didi Yao. Didi Yao asked the question in Chinese, but he asking the period that you study. you mentioned actually you covered at the beginning of the lecture. So what is the historical period that you study?
Okay, I basically cover roughly 60 so years. I mentioned earlier at the beginning when it's basically from the Opium War and the gold rush to the founding of the Republic of China in 1911. This is, as you all know, is very important, the historical period. And also this is the peak period of illustrated news reporting. So I can take advantage the images from Harper's Weekly, from Frank Leslie's illustrated news, and from, of course, Wasp from Park Magazine. Another major consideration is copyright. Because anything published before 1923-24 is out of copyright protection. That's a practical reason why I only stopped 1911. By the way, I do collect, I want to continue my research of how Chinese people and China portrayed throughout the 20th century. I collect all the images from Life magazine, from Time magazine. Unfortunately, they are still under the copyright protection. So I contact Getty Images. They are managing the copyright magazine for copyright protection for Life magazine, Time magazine. So they will charge me $500 per images. So I hope that somebody, some wealthy people want to put their money in good use. If they have $50,000, $100,000 to spare, we can put that into good cause.
So Professor Zhang, you may like create a special foundation for your research and then do some kind of fundraising because your research is so important. Professor Zhang, I saw like two new questions. Liao Shenzhen, sorry for my poor pronunciation, asks, thanks Professor Zhang for your wonderful presentation. Understanding the history tremendously contributes to how we approach the present and the future. I'm curious about your thoughts on how you see your research play a role today in facing the challenges faced by Chinese and Chinese Americans in the US.
That's an excellent question. So we definitely need to play our role. We have to speak out against any racial discrimination. It's still ongoing. That's why we have this hashtag Stop Asian Hate. Because when something goes wrong, some people with a narrow viewpoint, they're always looking for a scapegoat. They all want to blame others. They rather not to take any responsibility. So that's totally wrong. That's called the racial discrimination. We need to, this is the country for all. We need to do our part. If we see any racial discrimination, we need to speak out and we need to unite it. We need to ally with other minority members in America and condemn and do our part really to make America, make the world a better place for everybody.
Thank you so much. I think Professor Zhang is a brilliant role model for everyone. So first, he has done great research to illuminate the history of anti-Asian and anti-Chinese discrimination and also the anti-Asian sentiments. And the second, Professor Zhang is here with us. He's sharing his knowledge and wisdom with us. And also, for me, I see the national trends. So right now, I know many AAPI communities are united together. So I think in many states, first, they are like promoting to require teaching AAPI history in different states. Right now, the Illinois and also the New Jersey passed the API bill. So then the API history is like required to teach in 12 education. I know many other states are on that way too. So another question is from Jane. Jane writes, Professor Zhang, can you comment on the comparison of the size of Black American immigrated and Chinese immigration?
Of course, the African Americans, their history in this country is much earlier, starting in 1619, when the first ship of a slave brought to North America. They definitely play a much larger, more significant role in the history of United States. They are major labor forces in the South, and they also bear the brunt of all the discrimination and racial histories in the early part of the United States history. So when you say the size of Black Americans, immigrants, I don't know exactly the actual numbers. I seem to remember the one statistic I look at in the 19th century, South Carolina, they have so many African Americans because they need a labor force in the cotton field, and in the north, it's a very small number. They just working in the household as servants, things like that. So I feel that the numbers there, the Chinese, actually, I know this scholar recently did a research on the Chinese and African Americans, their interactions over the years. Definitely was a reading. I personally feel that the Chinese need to work with African Americans and any other minority members to promote our common cause.
Thank you so much, Jean. I would love to recommend like a documentary for you. It's called like a Far East Deep South. The documentary was made in 2020, I think. So I think the documentary itself is about the Chinese Exclusion Act and its long-term impacts on Chinese families. But I think in the same time, the documentary also showed the integration of Chinese immigrants and the Black American immigrants in the South. Thank you so much, Professor Zhang. Okay, so I will type the name. It's like a Far East Deep South.
Thank you, Professor Yu, for the invitation. I greatly enjoy sharing my learning experience. So I basically want to say that really history makes man wise. It's often said that those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. So it's only with a full understanding of what happened in the past that we can look forward to a better future. Thank you.
Thank you. So please feel free to show your face and applaud, and also feel free to use the applause reactions. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Zhang, for giving us such a wonderful and important talk. And also thank you so much for all your important work in creating a better and just society for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thanks, you too. Have a nice weekend.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good night.